Hello, I'm Emily, and with me in the studio I've got Lauren, who's one of our graduates in the graduate programme, and joining us by the miracles of the internet, we've got Leanne, who's one of our JVPs, and Matt, who mentors graduates in our Milton Keynes practice. They're all joining us today because all three of them were winners at our recent graduate awards, so it's really great to have them here with us today. So today we're looking, aren't we, really at how practices might support new graduates, and also what graduates themselves might want to know as they're starting their careers. The support you get at the start of any career is so important, and coming straight out of university, those first few steps in practice can be really daunting, can't they? And not only that, it's quite a responsibility for a practice to help shape those early days in that person's life as a vet. So it's important that everyone gets it right. Leanne, how would you say that a practice sort of go about preparing for a new graduate vet to start with them?
First thing is, you meet your graduates before you offer them a job. So right from the start, find out where they're up to, what they feel confident with, and be conscious of graduates that are coming through now, because they've had a heck of a time with COVID and disrupting their placements, and they may not have the same amount of practical experience that they think they should have. And certainly our EMS students that are coming through at the moment are feeling really insecure about that. They're very worried about it. So I think if you're looking to recruit a graduate, a really good idea is using the EMS skills matrix that's on the kennel, because it has a really nice breakdown of practical skills, and not just have you done a bitch spay, but how comfortable are you speaking to a client? How comfortable are you taking histories? Have you ever dealt with difficult situations? That kind of thing. So it's really worth making time to sit with a coffee, maybe go out and do something like that, so that you just know each other, you know where you're at, and that the graduate gets to know you a bit as well, and know your mannerisms, and so that they feel that you're approachable. This is going to be a tough couple of years for new grads, so they're going to need lots and lots of support, and it's always super daunting, really daunting time. So being mindful of that's really helpful.
That's so important, Leanne. And when the graduate does start, remember that it can be a complete change in lifestyle. They might never have worked before, they might have moved to a different town or a different country. As a practice, you might want to think a bit outside the box too. Could you organise a meal for everyone and make them familiar with the area? They might not know anyone else, so you might be the only person that they've ever met. You could even organise a coffee shop meet so that on the first day they see a familiar face in the building.
I think the other thing to touch on, obviously, is that there is this new RCVS Vet GDP, and so it is really important now that a practice planning on taking a graduate is kind of up to speed on what they need to do, because obviously you do need a Vet GDP advisor now, or at least have somebody working towards that. And I mean, there's lots of information on the RCVS website that will talk about becoming a Vet GDP advisor, so we weren't going to go into great depths on that today. But I think what that's really good for doing is just making people do that preparation, and obviously the CPD that's on there, there's some really good stuff about learning how to give feedback and how to mentor those people, so it's really good to work through. So Matt, how about once they do start working, kind of what would you suggest them?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do at our practice is try not to have the graduate actually sort of implemented onto the rota for those first couple of weeks, if possible. I think what that allows them to do is to just kind of start working without the addition of time pressure. So, it does require a certain amount of proactivity from the graduate, but we'll be asking them to kind of going for booster vaccinations, and starting their operations, forming bonds with members of the team, and just generally getting sort of an idea of where everything is within the practice. So when they initially start and sort of to be put on the diary and they've got the appointments booked for themselves, which we try to give them a little bit longer time when they are scheduled to do them, they've already got that sort of footing and that basis to work from. So hopefully they feel a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, and that brings us on to the teaching of the clinical skills, really.
Yes, when you leave university, you graduate with such a vast amount of clinical skills and an unbelievably fantastic knowledge set, but you won't know everything. At first, this feeling can be really daunting, and my advice to any new graduates is to utilise the resources and the people around you. Also, never forget that senior vets are still presented every day with moments when they don't know what to do, and that is absolutely okay. It is important to be aware of your limitations and ask for help whenever you're unsure, and your JVP would always prefer that you do ask if you ever are in that situation. But also have the confidence in what you do know, because you know a hell of a lot of things. This year's and last year's graduates may feel slightly behind, maybe due to lack of clinical placements during the COVID pandemic. But I feel that every person is in the exact same shoes, and if anything, this pandemic will make you more adaptable to change and might make you better suited.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that CPD doesn't replace learning in practice, and neither does EMS. There is some learning that just has to happen when you're in practice. And our graduate programme, for example, it provides you with about 10 days of CPD a year, and lots of that is clinical teaching. And it's great because it does mean you learn like loads about the cases that you'll be seeing day to day. And certainly for us, we focus that CPD on how you deal with things in first opinion practices and not in referral, because that's not where our graduates are. But it's not the same as the repetition of practical techniques and that first-hand feedback from having a really experienced colleague working alongside you right there in the moment. Leanne, do you have sort of any tips on learning those practical skills and teaching those practical skills in practice, things like taking blood and putting catheters in and all those sort of little bits that we need to get comfortable with?
I mean, practice makes perfect. But it's not just your JVP and it's not just your mentor that can help you with that. The nurses are absolutely hands down the best people to learn you, to teach you. I went a bit Scottish there. To teach you the tricks of the trade, all the hints and tips. It is just practice, and everyone has to learn. And the thing to remember is no one was born knowing how to put an IV cannula in. We all had to learn. We all had to blow a few veins to get to where it looks like we can just flick them in with our eyes closed. It's a learning curve, and you'll get there. And don't be dispirited if you fluff it the first few times. Every time you fail, you're closer to success. We've all been there.
And Matt, I mean, anything that you can add to that?
Yeah, very similar, really. I think the other thing is just then, as Leanne was saying, when you have those things that don't quite go right, don't shy away from sort of having another go at those things. That's part of what your mentor will be there for, to support you through the things that you find sort of difficult in your job. So, say for different surgeries, it might be actually you've done a lot of one surgery and not many of another, like different spays and things like that. So, sometimes I think there's a tendency to want to avoid them because it's a bit scary, but your mentor should hopefully be there for you so that they can support you through it. And then you'll do a few, and the confidence levels will just shoot up because you'll be so much more comfortable with what you're doing.
Yeah, there's some really great points, Matt. Remember as well that you can get the whole team involved in doing this. It doesn't all have to be one person or one mentor. Over the past 2 years being in practice, I've learned invaluable skills from the nursing team. Make friends with the nursing team because they have given me a fantastic set of skills, and they are usually really experienced in many things. At first, you might only take a couple of attempts at placing kind of IV catheters. Just be patient with yourself, be kind, and keep practicing all of the clinical skills because, as Leanne said, practice will make perfect.
Yeah, and so in addition to our clinical skills side of things, we also spend a large proportion of our graduate programme focusing on those non-clinical skills, don't we? So I think sometimes when we first start as vets in practice, we don't always think these are as important. I think they can be forgotten about both at university, by us ourselves, but also when we start in practice, there's a real focus on what we need to learn clinically. We need to know everything we need to do to be a vet. And actually, as time goes on, you start to realise that they're really vital. And I know I can say from experience that now I look back and think, wow, there's some of these non-clinical skills that I'd wish I'd learned a lot earlier on, because actually they're the bits that are often key to making your life loads easier as a vet, whether that's like talking to clients or working with your colleagues or looking after yourself. So in our programme, that obviously, as you know, Lauren, we focus on some of our CPD events purely on these topics. But it's really useful as well if practice teams also think about the non-clinical skills when they're teaching their graduates. So, for example, I know a lot of the people when they first come into practice will make lists. I don't know if you did this, but will make lists of things that they want to work on. So, sort of bitch spays, complex extractions, managing a diabetes case, etc. But if you're working on a list like that, what I would say really to graduates is like make sure you include some of those non-clinical elements as well. So maybe you want to have a go at responding to a complaint, or maybe you want to kind of get better at leading a team through a morning of operations or things like that. And don't forget to include those in your list of things to work on, because these are the things you can demonstrate, or JVPs and senior vets can demonstrate in just the same way as some of the other skills. And Leanne, I'm sure this is an area that you could sort of comment on as well, because I know you're very passionate about the non-clinical teaching side of things.
In the waiting room, we can overhear each other. So that's really useful for giving immediate feedback and saying, do you know, you could just have phrased that slightly differently and got a different outcome. And it's made me realise how useful immediate feedback is, instead of waiting until appraisal time and sort of say, or one-to-one time and say, what have you found difficult? You can really pick up on each other, how you're getting on. But yeah, it's really important to check in with each other and ask your seniors, how would you have dealt with this situation, or there was something that I could have. I don't think I handled it quite as well as I could have, and just keep talking to each other and suck all the knowledge you can out of everyone around you, because that's what they're there for.
And Matt, how about you when you've been mentoring the graduates in your practice?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I try to sort of emphasise is to I think a lot of the time when we start as new graduates, we tend to dwell on certain things. So, it might be that you do a couple of things on a Friday and then you worry about them over the weekend. So, did that consult go as well as it could have? Is that operation I did going to be okay? That bitch spay, that cat spay? Was the treatment I recommended the right one? And could I have done anything better? And I think if you dwell on that, it really can sort of have a big impact in terms of how it makes you feel and have a big knock on your confidence. And personally, we've found that most of the time the graduate's done exactly the right thing. There's not been any problem with it. And if you sort of, I'd encourage people to reach out to the mentors or other sort of members of the team just to say, do you think that was right? Would you have done anything differently? And then that way, as I say, you get that little bit of reassurance, and hopefully you don't have to dwell on, worrying about if you've made a mistake or not. Because I say most of the time things will have gone absolutely fine.
I think that's really good advice. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How about?
Yeah, it's really great advice from both of you. I found that one of the toughest skills was actually working my way around the practice computer system and learning costings of things. My advice to start off, which I wish that I would have done initially, is to make a price list at hand, including vaccines, routine procedures, and create your own simple step-by-step guide to the computer system. Can be really useful. It can really speed up your consult times, but minimise your stress in a really busy consult column. Also, expanding on what Emily said, looking after yourself should be a vital skill that you help graduates to work on from day one. Supporting a graduate and ensuring they do have those coping mechanisms in place after a bad day is vitally important. Accepting that you will make mistakes can be so difficult, but already having those coping strategies in place can really change your mindset. One of the early CPD events that we went on the Vets for Vets graduate programme advised writing a list of 3 positive things at the end of every single day. And this can really help to remind you of your successes. For example, if I had a really, really bad day in practice, what I would do is I would think, even if there's not many things that have gone right, the positive things might be that one of the nurses brought me a fantastic cup of tea, which honestly made a really bad day feel so much better.
And I know actually just before this, Lauren, we were talking, weren't we, about how you reframe situations when something bad's happening, and I thought that was really good advice. I don't know if you could just sort of share that little snippet of what you do as well, because I thought it was such a lovely
absolutely. We were having a conversation earlier over lunch. Actually, it's something that I often do to make a really negative situation turn into something really positive. And what I do is I put the phrase "but luckily" after most things. So, for example, it's raining really hard outside, it's torrential, but luckily I have an umbrella. Or in a situation in work even, I've got a really, really busy set of consults, but luckily I managed to have a lunch break.
Yeah, and I think that's really good, and it just helps you remember, and it's a real technique that you can do to kind of reframe positive situations. So yeah, I think that's really important. So we've talked about those like soft skills, like communication skills. But it's not just about communicating with clients, obviously, is it? You need to get used to communicating with your colleagues as well, especially when something isn't quite right. And I'll often speak to a graduate who has maybe a problem in the practice but hasn't actually told anyone about it. And obviously, no one can make changes if they don't even know that there's a problem. So we've got lots of different layers of support built into our programme. We've got area managers, we've got the clinical field teams, we've got obviously our graduate team, and there's so much we can do to help, but only if we know that you need help. And for graduates, I mean, I would say the message really is, if you're struggling, you must tell somebody.
Absolutely, I think that's so important. From a practice point of view, it's about making sure that the graduate has a bit of room to talk and feels like they can approach you. It can feel quite daunting for a new graduate to go up to a new member of the team, one of your JVPs or your bosses, when they're in a really, really busy situation, and ask for some of their time. But I can guarantee you that your senior colleague would always rather you ask and be as open as possible, so that they're aware of how you feel and can act upon that. As Emily rightly mentioned, if you're struggling to tell someone, a problem shared really is a problem half, so make sure that you do reach out.
And Matt?
I'd say that, I think one of the key things from a mental point is making sure that you set aside the time to have regular one-to-ones with your graduate. The immediate feedback, just like Leanne was saying, is so important day to day, but maybe a sort of a weekly kind of catch up where the time is specifically set out, maybe taken out of consults or something like that, so that the graduate has a chance to just get some things off their chest. Again, discuss things that maybe they didn't think went so well, and things that they want to sort of improve on. So then you can just continue to keep that communication lane open at all times, really.
Yeah, sure. And it can, again, feel quite daunting when you're in a new place to speak up, but having that time set aside, that scheduled time to talk, really can help. And like you've said earlier, your boss might not realise anything's wrong unless you tell them. It is so important for your mental well-being to discuss any problems or feelings and not just internalise them and keep them to yourself. Even if you don't want to speak face-to-face with your boss or your JVP, you could utilise other forms of communication, such as you could email them if you prefer that form of communication, or speaking and confiding to a different colleague or friend.
Yeah, and I mean, so one thing I do to encourage graduates is to encourage them to bring a solution wherever possible, not just a problem. So I think if we try to spend some time kind of really thinking about what it is that we need to change, what's upsetting us. I'll sometimes say, okay, so you could wave a magic wand and change one thing. What would that thing be? Mm-hmm. Because then you're really clearly communicating what it is. You're being as specific as possible. And that gives the person that you're talking to the best chance to try and find the solution to that. And even better, if you can then suggest what a solution might be, you're helping them along the way. If we always go and talk to people just with a problem, they've got to do a lot of thinking then to find out what they're going to do as a solution, and that can be quite difficult. So bringing just as much information to that discussion as possible is really, really good. And Leanne, I know that you do a lot within your practice to try and be flexible around the needs of your colleagues, sort of when it comes to things like work-life balance and what that looks like for them.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has got different priorities in life, and work's not always everyone's top priority, but you have to make work for you. So, I mean, even at interview stage, we always ask what would be your ideal amount of hours, what would be your ideal rota. So some of my vets are on 8-hour, they're on 40-hour contracts, but some will be on 8-hour shifts 5 days a week, and some are on 10-hour shifts 4 days a week. Some people really like doing that mammoth shift in return for the extra day off. I did that for years. It doesn't work for me now. I can't. I don't have the stamina for it. So I do 5 shorter shifts. People's priorities change as well. Lives change. People meet life partners, leave life partners, have children, get a dog, want a longer lunch break so they can get a proper walk. You need to be able to approach each other and say, what I'm doing now is not working for me. Is there anything we can do to tweak it? Because quite often there is. It's just a case of adjusting the diary for when the people can be there. It's got to be give and take. It's got to work both ways. It can't just all be one way. It can't just all be the employer making demands or the employee making demands. But you can usually make things work with a little bit of lateral thinking.
Yeah, I think that's so true. So we've talked a bit about communication, haven't we, and communication between colleagues. But let's spend a little bit of time looking at feedback now.
Feedback is such a massive topic. It's so important at any life stage and your career stage. It's how we learn and develop. It can sometimes be really hard to take and we do have a tendency to focus on the negative feedback, which can lead us to sometimes dismiss those positives or to dwell on what went wrong rather than focus on what we can do better next time. My advice, if that sounds like you or anybody else, is to recognise that it is something that you do and be open about this with your colleagues. They can help you to talk it through when something does go really wrong if you do get that bad feedback. When you receive any form of feedback, rather than worry and focus on those really small negatives, take that time to think about what you have learned, write it down, transform it into an action plan and how you're going to work forward. If you do employ a new graduate, remember that receiving positive feedback can honestly make their day. Pass on positive comments from clients and praise them on their successes. Don't just focus on those negatives.
Yeah, and I mean, when vets first come out of university, there's often a big shift in their confidence, and it's well recognised because you go from it's what we would call being unconsciously incompetent. So you don't know what you don't know, to consciously incompetent, where you suddenly realise there's an awful lot you don't know. And I mean, that can be in the space of like your first 10 consults as a vet, and you suddenly realise, goodness, I really know nothing. And initially you feel like uni must have set you up with all the knowledge you need to be a vet, and it really does only take those few consults to realise that no, maybe I don't know actually the vaccine protocol of this practice, or even what drawer the syringes are kept in. And it's that sudden shift that can really cause some people to panic, especially when they're comparing to everyone around them and everyone else seems to know what they're doing. And that's when good feedback is especially important, partly to remind them of all the things that they do know and are getting better at, and partly to remind them what level they're expected to be at for a new graduate, so that they're not comparing and expecting themselves to be that 10-year qualified vet next to them. And so, like you said, Lauren, reactions to feedback can really vary. And it's only useful if it's well received and understood, which is why it's also really important that when we give feedback, we do it well. So we've kind of worked together to pull together some of our kind of key bits of advice, if you like, our top to-dos when it comes to feedback. So I think we're going to start with you, Leanne.
Well, the first one, like I said before, is make it timely. It's easier to do 100 tiny little nudges than to save everything up for a monthly one-to-one, which can just feel like an onslaught of criticism. Whereas if you just deal with something in the moment, it's done, it's dusted, it's gone. That's definitely my top tip. And the other is to make sure that one-to-ones happen and that they are framed as a mutual conversation. So for both sides to sort of say what's gone well, what could have gone better. You don't frame it as what went wrong and berate each other for what you think you should be doing better, because that really erodes the trust in the relationship. It's got to be mutual. We're here to develop the graduates are here to develop their careers, and it can be really synergistic, and feedback is really useful. Don't be daunted by it, welcome it. But you do need that relationship of trust between each other. And that's built by getting to know each other and doing it regularly. It's a constant process.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then, as Leanne said, being timely is really important with your feedback, but also being specific. So as well as saying sort of things like well done or you're a great vet, if you say those all the time, actually it doesn't have that much impact. It's easily lost just to kind of say well done as a passing comment. So saying things like you don't really, you really need to do better next time, or don't do that again. Again, it's not very specific. It doesn't give any helpful pointers as to what went wrong. So instead, it's kind of a case of being specific with what they did well. So, well done for today. That was a really tricky operation. You stayed calm. You approached it really methodically. You handled that tissue really well. It's much harder for somebody to dismiss that feedback, and it's also constructive. You've told them what it is they did well, so they can do that again. And if that were constructive feedback, then they've also got their kind of action points that they need to work on there. So Matt, I know you've got some suggestions as well.
Yeah, I think with the feedback, it's quite important to be focusing on sort of what's happened rather than that person's sort of personality or their personal characteristics, because everybody's got things that they're better at or that they sort of struggle with a little bit. And I think that feedback really should focus on exactly sort of what has happened and what's been done. So, for example, if you're talking about something, you don't want to be saying you need to be better at staying calm, because some people will find that very difficult. More of a case of you got very overwhelmed in that situation because you tried to take on the emergency as well as the hospitalised patient you had and your list of consults. Perhaps next time you can look at delegating some tasks in order to reduce the sort of the onus and the stress on you. And that way, as I say, you're sort of making a positive suggestion for a way that they can hopefully sort of approach the situation differently the next time, rather than kind of accidentally kind of criticising their character in any way. And I think it's important to then sort of try and get a response to see how they feel with the feedback that you've given. I think quite often it's you'll find that positive feedback is met with with surprise and oh really, I didn't realise that was good, or I thought that client didn't really like me and they've left me a wonderful review, and then just trying to to go a bit further into that and say, okay, well, why do you feel like that? Because I think often then some of the sort of maybe things that their self-doubt and the insecurities, they can sometimes people start to realise that it's not anything that they need to be sort of worried about, and they're better at certain things than they thought they would. And I think it's just very important to make sure that when we're doing more constructive feedback, not just sort of criticising what they did, but also mentioning what they could have done differently the next time to avoid sort of a similar outcome. So just making sure that it is a learning tool rather than a critique.
Yeah, and so I guess one of the other bits that I would add is remembering to give positive feedback. So failing to give good positive feedback is actually one of the most common pitfalls. So as Lauren said earlier, many of us, and it's not just graduates at all, we have a real tendency to pick out negative comments and feedback and really focus on these. And so it's really important to catch ourselves and make sure we are giving positive feedback when it's due and paying just as much attention to how that's delivered, and spend as long thinking about how you're going to make that really land with somebody as when you're giving them maybe that more difficult constructive feedback. Because most of the time we're saying well done when somebody finishes the ops list. We kind of just say it in passing. So they don't, we assume that they are taking that in, and of course they know that they're doing well because we've just told them well done. But more often than not, actually, that graduate has no idea how they're doing because they haven't really taken that in, so they're not hearing it, so they're thinking we aren't telling them.
Yeah, really great points. Again, expanding on the importance of positive feedback should always be there. You might have heard people suggesting that you can make people accept negative feedback better by doing something called sandwiching, and it's a phrase that's been thrown around quite a lot over the past few years. And in reality, we've also got quite wise to this, I feel. If you've been, for example, if you've been called into the office for a chat with your boss and it opens with, great job with the bitch spray this morning, you did a fantastic job, but I want to talk to you about the cat spray that went wrong yesterday. There is no chance that the bitch spray compliment will stick, and it will probably be dismissed straight away as something that you've just said to make them feel better. It would be much better and logistically a better approach to give them some specific timely feedback about the cat spray that went well yesterday, discussing how they're going to respond to it, what they can do differently next time, and then today, the following day, deliver the specific timely feedback on the bitch spray that went well.
Yeah, and so the other thing is to get the team involved with feedback. So make sure that your whole team knows how to give feedback to one another. It's a really powerful tool for learning at any stage, and it carries much more weight when it's delivered by the person who observed the task than somebody who kind of heard what happened third hand 2 days later when they've got back from annual leave. So really empower your whole team and encourage them to give feedback to one another. So yeah, to summarise, give feedback in a timely manner, make sure it's an appropriate time though, and make sure you're specific, make sure that you're commenting on their performance, not their personality, take time to check their reactions, encourage them to reflect on the feedback, never forget to give positive feedback, but don't just use it to sandwich either side of the negative stuff, just for the sake of it, and get your whole team involved in feeding back to one another. Yeah, and Leanne, I know that that's something within your team that you do with feedback.
Yeah, we started it a few years ago. It's a really lovely thing. It's called possum points because we like a pun as well. So when someone's been awesome, you can give them a possum point. And it can be silly or serious, but we just have little scraps of paper in a big sweetie jar. And if someone does something impressive or kind or above and beyond the call of duty, scribble it down anonymously on a bit of paper and they all get put in the jar. And then once a month at the practice meeting, we divvy them all out. So everyone gets a little envelope full of nice things other people have said about them. And on a bad day, if you go in your handbag or your pocket and you find a little envelope full of nice things that people have said about you and how you do your job, it goes a long way to making you feel better. Yeah, sometimes you wouldn't say something quite as soppy to someone's face as you might on an anonymous note. So we started it, as I say, a few years ago. We'll never stop it because it makes everyone's life a bit better.
I love it. I also love a pun, so I think that's really great. But it's a really, really good idea, and it's something that's so simple for practices to do as well. And it kind of that leads us on really. So despite all of these sort of wonderful things that we can do to support people, unavoidably at times some graduates might struggle, and there's so many different reasons why somebody might be having some difficulties, and we can only really obviously scratch the surface on this. But we've talked about how important it is for graduates to speak up if they have a problem. But the same does go for the people that are mentoring them too. So if you have a graduate who's struggling, it can be quite hard to know the best thing to do, and it can be quite stressful for you too. So in the same way, do make sure that you talk about it. Use your network to share what has worked for other mentors, and make sure that you're not being too harsh on yourself. Where possible, really do your best to try and pinpoint the problem. So if they're not progressing as fast as you'd hope, you might jump to the assumption it's their clinical skills, where it might actually be their decision making or their confidence that are the problem. Another example is that we'll often get frustrated, for example, by poor timekeeping. And actually, you can narrow down what's causing this. So is it that they need to practice communicating with clients more succinctly, or are they actually struggling to decide what to do with that case, and that's what's taking them the time? And once you know more detail, then you know how better to support them. In some cases, that can mean sort of carefully targeted CPD, and that may or may not be clinical. But there are lots of people out there who deliver CPD on soft skills and do coaching to build confidence. And so I do encourage people to not just always think of clinical solutions when the problem may be non-clinical. Matt, I'm not sure if you sort of had some thoughts to add on that one.
Yeah, I think just what you can't sort of what you can't underestimate is just being there for your new grad. I think sometimes that when you're really busy, you're running behind on consults yourself. Let's say there's emergencies. Just to be able to sort of welcome the new guy with a smile and a yes when they say, "Can I just ask you a quick question?" It can be really reassuring for them, because sometimes if you're not able to do that, and we may all have seen sort of instances of that where maybe people can't haven't offered that feedback, it can really knock their confidence and affect their sort of willingness to want to come and talk to you the next time that they have a problem. And I think we always want to be sort of, like you've just said, encouraging them to speak up as much as we can. And like I say, just being there and just kind of, being available, it can make a big difference.
And I think one thing I would say as well, also to kind of add to that, is that If a graduate is struggling more kind of mentally or emotionally, is to really check that they are reaching out to their support network as well as you being available to them, because it's not that uncommon that I've spoken to graduates who are finding things difficult and they've almost like isolated themselves, and they're going home and they're dwelling in the evenings. I think you talked about, Matt, earlier, that they were spending the whole weekend worrying about something and maybe not talking to people. So really encourage them to engage with friends and family wherever possible and talk to them. And maybe if you know other graduates in the area, you could put them in touch with, or get someone in the team to suggest doing something kind of social with them.
Yeah, they're all really great points from all of you. I think that everyone struggles at some point, and it's what you do in that moment of struggle which is really important. Vets, new graduates, vet students are renowned for carrying the perfectionism trait, and it's been talked about quite a lot over the past few years. And this can make one small mistake or a bad day turn into a really tragic feeling. As Emily mentioned, and Matt and Leanne, reaching out to people, having a good rant on the phone to a friend can take away a lot of that worry. If you do notice that your new graduate at the practice might be struggling, asking them, what can I do to help? Would you like to talk? Can feel really reassuring. And just asking them that simple question on a really bad day can then lead to more open conversations and bring on those chats.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've covered loads there. So let's finish on a positive note, hey? Leanne, I'm going to come to you first. What has been a real kind of highlight, the most rewarding part of having graduates at your practice?
Just seeing how pleased they are when something they couldn't do becomes something that they can do. And once you've got that skill nailed, you've got it. And just that buzz of thinking, yeah, you thought you couldn't do that, and look at you, you're nailing it. That's the most rewarding thing.
Amazing. And Matt, how about you?
Yeah, it's very similar. It's just lovely to see the graduates sort of develop and kind of just blossom into the sort of the vet that they're going to be. And I think just generally having the graduate there and trying to create that sort of that atmosphere for learning and that sort of open environment has just a really beneficial sort of impact on the whole team as well. So it really does kind of lift the whole practice.
Yeah. And Lauren, we don't want to leave you out. How about sort of what has it meant to you having a supportive practice? What difference has that made?
Wow, I don't even know where to start. I arrived at my practice what feels like many, many years ago. As an undergraduate student, I started going there on EMS, what feels like a lifetime ago. I'm now 2 years into the graduate programme. I'm coming to the end of the 2 years now, and I'm currently staying in the practice that I've at. The support and mentoring from my bosses and colleagues is honestly admirable, and I feel lucky every single day to be a part of that team. It is an exciting and equally terrifying time being a new graduate, especially in the current situation. But hopefully the topics that we've just discussed and covered will make that transition easier for the new graduates and also the people that are employing them. A message out there to all the new graduates that are starting off. I'd first of all say congratulations, because you are a vet, which is an incredible achievement. It's unbelievable, and never forget that. Always be kind to yourselves, be patient with yourselves, and enjoy the new adventure, because it's an incredible thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really exciting time. To say you are a vet, and this is, for lots of them, something that they've wanted to be for a very, very long time. So definitely enjoy all the highlights of that. Well, thank you. So thank you, Matt and Leanne, for joining us, and thank you, obviously, Lauren, for all your advice as well. It's been great having you all with us, and I really hope that it's helped. Thank you.